He is the co-artistic director of Rorschach Theatre, is on the faculty, and is the director in residence at American University, as well as on the faculty at the National Conservatory of Dramatic Arts. He's also playwright at the Arena Stage. He offers classes through the Writers' Center in Bethesda. Besides writing and directing for the Rorschach Theatre, Randy has directed for Source Theatre, Inkwell Theatre, First Draft, NCDA's Actors Repertory Theatre, Wayward Theatre, Cherry Red Productions, American University, Imagination Stage, and Young Playwrights Theatre. Next month, he'll actually be directing his own play in New York City, and he lives in the DC area since 1997 is when you came in. Tonight he's going to be talking about his experiences and successes as a playwright with a talk called The Monsters That Live Under the Writer's Bed. So, let's welcome Randy. Thank you.
Thank you, Kat. And I'll have you guys know that we came up with that title in the hall 5 minutes ago. So.
That's how good he is.
Thank you so much for coming today, guys. So I did want to talk about monsters today. Because I think monsters are really relevant for us as writers. And though I'm a playwright, and I'm going to be talking, a lot of the examples I'm going to be using are coming from my experience as a playwright, but I do hope that some of the things that I say today will have a sort of universal appeal that we all sort of go through, even if you're not a playwright, if you're a fiction writer or a poet or what have you. Because I do think that when we talk about the monsters underneath our beds, the things that haunt playwrights are the same thing that haunt all writers. And the monsters beneath our bed, I think, are the things that keep us from writing. You would think that the easiest thing in the world, we're writers. That's what we want to do, right? We want to write. But there are a lot of things in the way, and it seems like no matter how hard we try to get away from these monsters, they keep coming back. But before I get into that, I wanted to start with what I think is sort of a kind monster, or a friendly ghost, what have you, and that is the monster that seems like something we need, and that is the monster of inspiration. So I talk a lot about, I talk a lot about the story. I use it as an example. But when people say, what made you want to be a playwright, or what made you want to go into theater, I often talk about summer camp. And once upon a time, a million years ago, I was a camp counselor, and it was, and I remember my favorite thing at camp was always telling the ghost stories. There's one time in particular I remember where we'd been there a number of sessions, and I had rehearsed this ghost story, and over time the ghost story had gotten more and more complex. And there was this one night that the ghost story really was sort of my coup de grace. I mean, it was the best ghost story I'd ever told. And the 10-year-olds were all listening to the ghost story, and they were on the edge of their seats, and I was scaring the bejesus out of them. And then at the end of all good ghost stories, you go bah, and they all jumped, and they're all scared. They all went back to their tents, and then all night you would see flashlights going on in those tents, because they were all too scared to sleep. And what's crazy is these kids, these American kids, coming from a relatively cynical world, they're not taught to believe in monsters or ghosts or anything like that. But for that one night, against all odds, these kids believed in ghosts. They weren't scared because it was a scary story, but because they actually believed the ghosts would actually come to get them. And I think that in a lot of ways, everything that I do, everything that I write, and every sort of piece of theater that I make, I'm really only just trying to get back to that point when I can make someone believe in ghosts. And I think that's what we all try to do, right? I think we try to make the people believe in something that isn't true. I think a lot about the moment in Winter's Tale, in Shakespeare's Winter's Tale, where Leontes comes to the statue of his dead wife, and he's in despair. And Paulina, his servant, comes up to him and says, and basically tells him that his wife can come back to him if he just believes. What she says? She says, "It is required you do awake your faith," and he does, and he believes, and the statue comes to life, and he gets his wife back, and the play has a happy ending, unlike most Shakespearean plays. And the moment, I think, is more than about just sort of pulling a rabbit out of the hat. It's about the redemptive power of belief, that through belief anything is possible, that Leontes can become holy. And it's this act of belief that I think is often what we strive for. And all these things of inspiration, we have the inspiration, and it leads us to that final moment where we actually can make statues move. We can make people believe in ghosts. And I think that is something that we all strive for. But it is a difficult thing, right? I mean, inspiration is one thing, and coming to your final product is something very different. So I came to playwriting in a sort of roundabout way, and this might seem like a tangent, but it will come back on track. We'll see if I can stay on track. I have a lot of tangents. I tend to have a lot of tangents, but so I came to playwriting in a sort of roundabout way. I was always a writer, or I just wrote, but I was always the type of person who would never call myself a writer. In the secret dark of my bedroom, I was writing, but never would I ever tell anybody that I was a writer. And I don't know. I mean, I think that lots of people have this experience. But I was also, involved in making theater, and in a lot of ways, my first successes were not from writing; they were from producing. I started my own theater company in 1999, and it's been pretty successful. The fact that it's still here after economic recession means that we're doing something somewhat right. And we have a good time doing it. But so I started my own theater company, and I was a director first. I directed at my own theater company, a lot of other places, and over the years, I became known as a producer and a director. But still, I was keeping this dirty little secret that I was really a writer. And I don't know what it was that would keep me from saying that I was a writer. I don't know, what was it when I finished my first play? Was it when I got my first paycheck, or when I got my first commission, or when my first play got produced? I don't know at what point I was supposed to actually, because all those things happened, yet still I was saying, no, I'm a director, I'm a producer, but my writing thing isn't something that I really believed in. And I think that this is something that we all deal with. The idea that we somehow have to apologize for what we do, and I think that's an especially insidious monster. The idea that we not only do not have enough confidence in ourselves, but that somehow there is something dirty, something secret, something terrible about being a writer, or even admitting it. But maybe I'm just talking about me. I don't know. But my real point here is the path to becoming a writer is not always a clear one. There's no saying that you wake up when you're 18 and you say, gosh golly, I'm a writer. I think it goes in a lot of different directions. But all of this sort of brings up what I think is the biggest monster and the most terrible monster, and that is, of course, self-doubt. This idea that, I don't know, I'm not good enough. I'm not going about it the right way. I like that one, that somehow I'm not writing in the right way. I don't have the right process. What I'm saying isn't relevant. There are so many things and I think that this monster is particularly insidious because it actually it lurks beneath our own skin. That somehow the one of the biggest obstacles to actually creating the work you want to create is yourself. You know, that you're constantly talking yourself out of writing. I have this great idea, but I'm not good enough to write it. Maybe in 10 years I'll be good enough to write it. Actually, there was a play that I remember. I remember that I always wanted to write, and I would literally tell myself, when I'm a better writer, I will write this, because it's a good idea, but I'm not a good playwright. And I don't want to give it to someone else, but someday I'll be good enough. I'll be good enough to write this play. That play took 12 years to write. And I do think that in a lot of ways that play never really fully became what it was supposed to be, because I was constantly talking myself out of writing it. And that's never... I mean, can you imagine an architect doing that? You know, it's like, well, I'm going to build a building, but maybe when I'm good. I don't know. I mean, you have the idea, you got to strike while the iron's hot and do it. And I say this all in the past tense as if I don't still do this, of course. But I mean, self-doubt is there all the time, right? I mean, I'm fairly certain that Tony Kushner and David Mamet have the same kind of self-doubt that I do and that you do, and I think it's just a part of who we are. The trick is not listening to it, I think. Actually, one trick that I have learned. Wow, I have so many tangents. All right, so one trick I've learned actually in making these things happen is to actually stop talking about your writing. You'll say, I'm writing a play, and everyone will say, what's it about? And the instinct is to say, okay, so here's what happens. And you go on, you're in some bar, you're at a restaurant, and for 20 minutes you tell them what your play is about. The more you talk about your play, or whatever you're writing, the less you are doing of actually writing it. The more you talk about the play, the more you convince yourself that when you sit down, it's somehow a shadow of what you expect this play to be, and you stop writing. You're just talking about it, and you're just writing it. So I always say that if you stop talking about writing and say, yes, I'm writing a play, it's about loss. That's it. You don't need to. Mostly people are just bored when you talk about your writing. Just write it and show it to them, and then they'll see how amazing you are. But in this, and so in this realm of self-doubt and the idea of inspiration, we always talk about inspiration as being this really great thing, but the truth is that oftentimes inspiration can sort of get in the way, in the sense that inspiration can actually be, if we're constantly waiting for inspiration, we usually won't ever write. Sometimes you have a great idea. Sometimes you look at a picture and you say, "Oh my gosh, that is a story. This picture is a story in and of itself, and I'm gonna write an amazing thing about it." But usually inspiration doesn't strike, and the idea that we need to wait for inspiration is a terrible, terrible, terrible obstacle and monster that stays in the way of our achieving what we want to achieve. This idea, and it's a cliche, right? The idea that like a writer wakes up in the middle of the night, is lightning strikes, and they get out, they get their quill or their typewriter and something old, and they furiously type away because they have this great idea, and it's a romantic cliche, and I think that this cliche really gets in the way of us doing what we want to do. Because for most of us, writing is work. We want to do it. And it's so important to us. But sometimes you need to look at it like work. You need to sit down and, in the absence of inspiration, still come up with something. Because the truth is, I mean, lots of people have good ideas, and that doesn't make them writers. I mean, lots of people have good ideas. Lots of people have inspiration. Lots of people tell good stories. Lots of people, even have beautiful language. But they're still not writing the story that they want to write. Because inspiration, you can write a story without that initial inspiration. You can't write a story without all the other stuff. I think to be a good writer, sometimes you don't even need some of that. So there's this. So I use this example. This isn't my own example, but the word playwright, and I wish I could write it down, but so the word playwright is spelled wrong. Has anyone ever noticed that? That it's spelled Playwright, because it should be spelled ITE, right? I mean, that's how right is spelled. What is the word right? WRIGHT. Anyone know what that?
So it's like a craftsman.
Right.
Plowright.
Yeah, like it's this antiquated thing, like a wheelwright or a cartwright or it's from times of guilds and smithies and people who built things with their hands and got oil on them but playwright is this weird word that's this holdover because write doesn't even mean to write, it means to build. And I think that it's a really great way to look at writing in general, not just playwriting, but that the idea of writing a play is actually building a play. That you can start with nothing. You can start with one Lego brick, and you can build something, and you can build something great from it.